Last time we took our first look at ASP.NET Minimal APIs and did some benchmarking to compare them in terms of performance with the more traditional controller-based APIs, and we saw there was some performance benefit there. But this time I want to look at the structure of the program that we have, how we can use minimal APIs but still have a well-structured program. So what I've got here is an application I've written using a controller-based API. Very familiar if you've seen my other videos. This is looking at book reviews. So we've got this data access project where we've got the book review, the ID, the title and the rating. We've got a DB context, and this is all set up to use SQLite, so we've got the reviews database there. And then I've got the controller API with just the one controller that has lots of methods for accessing those. And if we run that one up, then we can see we get Swagger and the various endpoints and lots of information in there because we used the attributes back in the code to describe exactly what's going on with each one of the controller endpoints. We're going to be looking at that Swagger detail in the next video when it comes to minimal APIs. But let's add to this a minimal API project. So we'll go to the solution and just do an add, new project, and ASP.NET Core, and we'll just call this minimal API. Next, and then the thing you've got to make sure, amongst all the other things, is that use controllers is unchecked. As it says, that's what gives us a minimal API. We're going to still have Swagger, the Open API support, other settings as you like, but we'll create that. And as we saw last time, you get something very minimal indeed. Really, the only C# file is that program.cs, and what it's given us is just a weather forecast with a get that generates a random weather forecast. And so if we set that to be the startup project and run it up, then we get the Swagger with just that simple endpoint for the get that we can see some random weather forecasts. But we want to turn that into having our book review. So let's start doing that. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we've got a connection to our data access layer. So if we just add a project on there, and then let's also configure that. So we're going to just have this add DB context. So we're not using a repository or anything. We're just going to put that straight in there. So we'll put that up here. And then we're going to have to get hold of SQLite in this project. So we'll just go to NuGet packages and get SQLite and install it. And then just get the namespace. And then let's, for the very simple one, we can get rid of all this stuff related to weather forecasts. So we don't need that. We don't need that. And then we're just going to have the map get to be API/reviews. So really the same we had with the controller. And then get rid of the body of it. And in there, we can actually basically pinch the code that we had here because we can just go to the get and we'll just do an await. And then all of that. So we'll put that in there. That's what we're going to return. That means this has to be an async lambda. And also we need to inject this review context, which is what we just configured up there. So if we just put that in there and we inject not into the constructor like we did with the controller, but we just put it straight into the parameter list for the lambda. Also, although we'll see some use of them later on, we don't actually need either of those widths on the end. So as the absolute minimum, that's what we've got there. And if we now run this one up, you can see that there we've got our reviews. It's got the basic information that we need for Swagger. So it's showing us the success. It's showing us the data format that we're going to get back. And if I try that out, and we get back the list of all of the reviews that we've got in the database. So that's a very quick start that didn't take too much effort. Let's try another one of those now. So let's go back and put in another map get. And this one is going to be for the summary of all the reviews. So that's going to be /reviews/summary. And again, we can use basically the same code that we had here. So if we go down to the summary, a little bit more complicated in this case. We've got to do that group by to do the summary. So we'll put all that in there. And then the same sort of changes we need to make. We've got to just change that to review context. We've got to return just the summaries. I'll come back to that okay in a moment. But that should be working well enough. Run that one up. And there we can see we've got the summary. We can try that one out. And that's working as well. So the first two were pretty easy. Let's move on to another get now, which is going to be the get single item. So rather than get all, we'll just get a single one. So again, let's copy this. And then this is still going to be a map get, but we're going to have the parameters coming in. So I'm going to put in an int ID coming there as a parameter, and then we can configure that on the URL in the usual way, which is simply curly braces, ID matching the parameter I gave it, and then int for a type. And then again, we can grab that. So there is our get for a single one. So if we take that code there and paste it in here. Now I've got a slight problem here that when you've got a controller, you've got these helper methods in the base class like not found and OK to give you back the correct response codes. We haven't got those immediately available here. If I just comment that out for a second, what we can do is use a class called results, and that will give us the same sort of thing. So there we've got the results. And so now if we run that one up, and so there we've got the get by ID. If we try it out, if I just put an ID of 2, we get that OK. But something that you might have noticed is what we didn't have there was a description of what we're getting back. So if you look at the get all, you can see it knows we're getting back an array of those reviews. But we didn't have that available on the get by ID. And that's because this results doesn't give us back any really useful information. If I were to just do something like this, if I said var x equals, and then just take all of that again, you can see that x is simply of this type I result. It doesn't know what type we're dealing with. Whereas we've got an alternative, typed results, which looks very similar, but that is a generic, so it picks up the type, and we can see this is OK generic for book review. So that's a much better way of doing this so that Swagger can pick up the information and make use of it. So if we run that one up and have a look in the get by ID, you can see it now knows the format of the data that we're getting back. So that's a step forward. However, still not going to be that helpful, because if we reintroduce the not found, which we should have obviously, and then change that to having a typed results.notfound, which is still valid of itself, but it's giving us now a problem. And the problem we've hit here is that when we use a lambda, by default, it infers the return type of the lambda by looking at the return statement within the body. And so that's what's happening here. For example, that lambda has inferred that it's going to have an array of book reviews. But here, because we've got two returns with different types, it can't infer the type. And so we've got to explicitly put the type in there, and the common base class for all these things that we get back, in the case of a controller, it's something like I action result, but the term action is entirely related to controllers, so we actually just have this thing called I result. And then of course we've got to remember this is async, so it's actually going to be a task I result. But by putting that in there, you can see it's now happy with having the two alternative return types because they're both based on that I result. And so if we run that up, we can have a look at that, and unfortunately now you can see we've lost that information about what the return data structure is, and also it hasn't spotted that this could return both not found and OK. So we're going to fix those in the next video when we start looking at Swagger. For now, we're just going to have to live with that. But also you'll notice what we've got here is it's starting to get a bit cluttered. We've got a lot of functionality all going into the program, and really we want to get it more structured. So let's separate this out into a separate class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder called endpoints, which is kind of analogous to the controllers folder that we've got in the other project. And then in there, I'm going to add a class, which I'll call book review endpoints. And then I'm going to make this a static class, because remember, the big performance benefit with endpoints over controllers is you're not creating the controller object each time, so this is just going to be static. And then in here, I'm going to start putting methods to support each of the things that we want to do. So in fact, let's do that with a bit of copy and paste. So let's go to the program and grab hold of this first one, paste that in there, and then we're going to have to make a few changes. we're going to make this a public static async. We're going to have to give this a return type now, so that's going to be our task iResult, so it can't infer it at all anymore. And we're going to have to give it a name, and we'll call it get, and then it's not a lambda anymore, so we'll get rid of that, do a bit of tidying up, just get hold of that extension method there, and wrap it in the OK. And so that's our first one of those, and all we then need to do is back in the program, we can just put that straight in there. So we're going to say book review endpoints dot get, no parameters because we're just passing it in as a delegate. And so if we run that one, we can see it's still working. It's named it slightly differently, but it's still the same thing that we've got there. So if we do that with the rest of those, so let's take the summary next, and then the same basic process. So paste it in there. We're going to have to say public static async task iResult. This one we'll just call summary. Get rid of the lambda, and again we'll just do a typed results.ok on there, and do a quick reformat, and that should be working fine. And then we'll pop that back in there. So that one's working, and then let's do the same with the get single. Paste that in. Do our public static async iResult. Get rid of that and give it a name. So we'll call that get again. Tidy it up and go back in here, and we can see we've already got a problem. And the problem is we have named both of those endpoints simply get. Now in C# terms, that's not a problem because they are overloaded. So that one takes the ID, whereas that one just takes the review context. And when we're dealing with a controller, that works fine. So there you can see the controller method there is called get with the ID, and there is called get with nothing at all. The overloading works fine. But you can't do that when you are passing the names of the functions in as those delegates, because we're not providing any parameters there, and therefore there's no way that it can resolve that issue. So actually you have to give them specific names here. So we would have to call the first one get all and the second one get one or something like that, just so they can be disambiguated when it comes to passing them in here. So there's get all and get one. And so having done that though, if we run that up, then we've got all three of them working. Let's move on and add the other ones. And we can just copy these from the original controller and then do a little bit of work. So let's grab the post to start with and pop that into here. So a few changes we're going to have to make. It's going to have to be static. It's going to be an iResult, not an iAction result. We're going to pick up the book review from body as usual, but also we're going to have to pass in the review context. And then we've got this validate review. You may remember that. That was just checking that the review rating was in the range 1 to 5. So that's easy. We can just copy that and paste it just like we had in the controller. We then need to remove the underscore from the various review contexts. Unprocessable entity becomes typed results dot unprocessable entity. So that's really simple. But then we have a particular problem with post, which is the response that we send. So the thing about a RESTful API is when you do a post, when you create a new entity, you need to return the path to that newly created entity, so where it can be got from. And that's done in a controller with a created at action. But of course we don't have actions anymore. So the options we've got here are on our typed results. We can do either a created or a created at root. And probably the created at root is the safest one to go for, because it means if you change the root, this will change automatically and update. Problem is, we've got to give the root a specific name. And so to do that, we've got to go back to our program. And remember, the route we want is for the get one, because we want to get the one that's been created. And so what you've got to do is on there, add a with name, and then give this particular route a unique name. And so let's just call this get one. So it's nice and clear. Same name as the method is probably a good idea. You could put this on all of them just to be safe, but we only need it in this case, so I'll just introduce it there. So there we have that idea of get one. And then when we are doing the created at root, that first parameter is going to be that same name, so get one. So that means when it generates the URL, it'll look for the route called get one and use the URL that we've got there. All done automatically. One other slight change we've got to make here, actually, the order of the parameters is slightly different from what we have on the controller created action. So I'm actually going to use named parameters here just to be simple. So we're going to have root name is going to be get one, and then we'll have root values as all of that, and then the last one we'll have as simply value as the review object itself. So that's our post. Next thing we've got to do is just hook that up. So we'll take one of these and duplicate it. And so this is going to be a map post. It's just going to map onto reviews, and it's going to have the endpoint that we had there as post. So that's that working in there. Run that one up. There we can see the post. We've got some metadata which managed to work out to show us the structure. If we try it out, so let's change that to, let's say, Emma with a rating of 3. Execute that. That's worked okay. And you see it's sent us back. There is the URL that will take us to the new review. So if I just right click on that and go there, then you can see we're getting back Emma looking like that. So that post has worked okay. Last two we've got to do from the controller is the put and the delete. So let's do those both together. So there's the put and there's the delete. So let's put them in here. So again, change that to static. Pass in the review context. So we need both the ID and the body on there. And then we've got to do the usual things. So that needs to be typed result dot. Get rid of the underscore. Change that to I result, typed results in there, and typed results in there. So that's our put. And then for our delete, strip off those attributes. We'll come to those in the next video. Change it to static, change that to a result, pass in the context, change that, typed results dot. So you can see it's a fairly straightforward mechanical kind of process once you get going with these to convert the controller methods into endpoints. So we've got all of those there, and if we then go back to the program and then just put those last ones in, so our put and our delete, so make that one put, but put, just like the get one, needs to have the ID on there, and actually the same for delete. So if we delete that and then pop that on there and change that to delete. So now we should have all of those if we run that up. And then we can see we've got the 3 gets, so the get all, the get one, the get summary, and we've got the put, the delete, and the post. So all of those working just as they should be. So it's a pretty easy way to separate these out by putting them as static methods inside a static class, and then really they're very, very similar to what we have with a controller. The only real thing we've got to remember, a few different names like iResult, not iActionResult, and the helpers for the returns we have to get from typed results. That said, if you've got more than one entity type, the sort of thing where you'd have had more than one controller, then all of this mapping can get a bit cluttered because you'd have all of the mappings for the reviews and then all the mappings for the customers, all the mappings for the authors, whatever it might be. So we'd also possibly like to extract that out into a separate class as well. So let's go about doing that. So what we'll do is pop into here another class, and we'll call this one book review map. And again, we're going to make this static. And this one, we're going to actually give an extension method. So I'm going to say public static, and then it's going to return an I endpoint root builder. We're going to call this map book reviews, and it's going to take as the parameter, as an extension method, that same interface, that keyword, this, making it an extension method. And the reason we're doing like that is if we go back to the program and have a look at app here, and just look at the definition of it, this web application, you can see it's got a number of interfaces, but that iEndpoint root builder is the one we're interested in. So we've got that, and then all we need to do in here is we'll say var, and we'll call this group builder, and then we'll say equals builder, so that's the parameter that's come in, dot map group, and then we can give it the root of our API. So remember, all of those began with API/reviews. So this basically means we can group them together rather than having to put the full URL in each one. We can just do what's different about the individual ones. And then what we're going to do is we can, well, let's actually take all of those. So we can do a bit of copy and paste. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change that app to the group builder. So pop that in there. And then we can simply remove anything that says API/reviews, which is what we've got there. So I'll just replace that with a slash. That one can go completely. That one can go completely. You can't put nothing in there at all, so you do have to have the slash in there, but that should have removed them all for us. And then finally, because I'm returning this purely so we can chain them together in the normal sort of way you do with these extension methods, so we'll just return the builder on the end there, not the group builder, and that will keep everything happy. And then lastly, we can go back to the program and get rid of all of that and just say app.map book reviews. There was the thing I just wrote, and that will do all of the work for us. And so now, if we run that one up, we can see that's still all working fine, and we've separated out the functionality into our book review endpoints and the mapping into our book review map. Now, it could be argued that's going a bit too far to have two separate classes. Keeping all of that detail out of program is probably a good thing, but the reviews controller did both the mapping and the functionality in the one place. You could possibly do that with this as well. And it's easy enough to do because once we're here, we could go back to what we had originally and use lambdas in there rather than having the separate named functions. If things get really complicated, separate named functions might be a good idea. If it's not too complicated, then probably embedding the lambdas in here is going to make sense. And in fact, if you don't want to waste too much time doing all of that, there is a built-in tool that will do this. So what we can do is actually this. If we just go to endpoints, and what I'll do is add and then scaffolded item. And then if we go to API, you can see, as well as generated controllers, we can do this read-write endpoints. I'll just go for the simple one. So we're just going to go for an API with read-write endpoints. Click add on that. The model is going to be book review. The endpoint class, we're going to have a new one. We've already got something called book review endpoints. So let's just give this a different name of review endpoints. Click add on that. Leave everything there checked. Let it do the generation. And there you can see what it's done. It's created this review endpoints class, and then it's got a method called map book review endpoints, which is very similar to what I had there. We can see it takes that I endpoint root builder, and then it's not going to quite work because it needs a bit more fiddling around, but basically you can see it's done that map group. It's done a few more things that we'll be looking at in the next video when we look at all the information that's useful for Swagger. But that is the easy way to get that going. Then edit it for yourself. And you can also see that as well as my map book reviews, it's put the map book review endpoints in there as well. And that would give us absolutely everything. Obviously, as I say, not quite working, but with a bit of work, we can get that going. So that's what we've got. We've got almost everything working, but we haven't really got the Swagger information in there. We saw that we're getting very minimal information, not what we have with the controller. So next time, we're going to see how we can enhance what we've got there and actually put some Swagger information in there and get a very rich interface that we can see exactly what each one of those endpoints is doing. So if you like that video, do click like, do subscribe, and I'll see you next time.